Good evening. Thank you for being here with us this evening and online. We're very pleased to be able to host, as the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress, this conversation on protecting digital freedom and to examine how the United States and Japan are working bilaterally and multilaterally to help build secure digital global infrastructure. It's good to see some old friends here with us today. We're very pleased to be at Aiken Gump, and thanks to them and Francine Friedman for hosting us here. We're very pleased to have a delegation from Japan led by Vice Minister for Policy Coordination of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications of Japan, Mr. Hiroshi Yoshida, as well as FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr, who will make some opening remarks this evening, followed by a panel that will be introduced and led by our very own SVP, Dan Mahaffey. I'm going to call up Commissioner Carr to make his opening remarks first. We're very proud to have him back and very grateful for his engagement with us on a series of conversations on digital freedom. Commissioner Carr is someone who has invested a great deal of energy and understands the challenges we face both in technological and narrative competition with authoritarian systems, and has really moved the ball forward significantly for the United States and our allies on these set of digital freedom issues. So with that, please join me in welcoming FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr.
Well, thank you so much for hosting this event. It's wonderful to be back here at Aiken for it. Wonderful to see the Vice Minister. Had a great couple of words with him. Really look forward to his remarks as well. I think the U.S. and Japan have been such strong and enduring allies, particularly on the technology space, working together very well on 4G, on 5G, on supply chain issues. And so I really much look forward to continue to deepen that important, valuable relationship. For my part, as I mentioned, I'm FCC Commissioner. That means there's 4 of us that are commissioners at the FCC right now. So it's a 4-member body. Sometimes we're a 5-member body, depending. And we regulate a lot of the U.S. telecom sector. And one of the issues that's really important to me, to the agency, is national security. And we've taken a number of steps at the FCC to promote national security interests. It started a couple of years ago. It really accelerated. We took a hard look at some devices that were giving us concern, Huawei Gear, other devices similar to that. And we took a number of steps to address some of the security threats that were posed. And the very first thing that we did was a process that looked at denying subsidies to insecure gear like Huawei, like ZTE. And those efforts went a long way towards securing our networks. And the reason why this is so important was brought home to me. I was in a very, very small town called Great Falls, Montana, which is about 100 miles from the border with Canada. There's not a lot up there, except that's also where the U.S. keeps at Malmstrom Air Force Base our ICBM missile silos. And it's beautiful area. It is big sky country. It's wheat fields. And there's nothing up there except dotted throughout that landscape where the ICBM missile silos were. We found that there was a lot of cell towers running very high-powered Huawei systems that were, to put it nicely, over-provisioned for keeping an eye on the sparse populations that were out there. So we denied federal subsidies to that. We then came in with a process called Rip and Replace, which is a federally funded multi-billion-dollar initiative to actually remove some of that Huawei, ZTE, and other gear out of our networks. We're a little short on funding right now, so we need Congress to appropriate some additional dollars to complete that process. We've made a commitment, and it's a commitment that's necessary to promote our national security, so we need to follow that through with some additional action. Congress then also stepped up with a process called the Secure Equipment Act, which goes beyond simply denying subsidies to insecure gear, but actually asks the FCC to stop approving for use in the U.S. Any gear that is on our covered list, which is a list that identifies insecure gear. So we moved at the device layer. And then we also took a look at carriers. Carriers could also present threats to us in terms of data flows. And so we revoked some of the authorizing licenses for entities like China Mobile, China Unicom, China Telecom to promote our national security. We're also having a very robust discussion now in the US on the application layer. So we did devices, we have unanimity on some of the carriers. We're looking right now at the application layer, including TikTok and other insecure applications, at taking some actions there. I think as part of this, supply chain is vitally important. And this is another area where I think we in the US benefit from a lot of the innovation taking place in Japan. We are looking, for instance, at ORAN as another technology to give us more secure options for US networks. Rakuten and others are very innovative when it comes to that ORAN space. And so we very much appreciate their contributions. And I think increasingly, network security, supply chain resiliency are taking on added urgency in the tech and telecom sector. It used to be you make a phone call, that's what the network was for. But now our most vital information, our most sensitive information is stored, is transmitted on interconnected networks. We have to make sure they're secure. And similarly, we need to work with our partners around the world, our allied friends, to make sure that we are taking very similar actions. We've been very pleased to see the action, for instance, in Europe, looking at taking similar actions to the US on Huawei, on ZTE, including some announcements just recently about some additional actions in Germany on Huawei. That's been very, very good to see. And there's a lot of international conferences and standard setting bodies that, again, we work very closely with all of our allied partners to make sure we're promoting safe, secure technology, safe, secure supply chains. And so once again, I'm very, very pleased to be here. I really much look forward to this discussion in continuing to promote our shared interest, US and Japan, in safe, secure, reliable communications and supply chains. So thank you very much for having me say a couple of words, and I'm going to stick around so I can learn something myself and look forward to the remarks of the Vice Minister. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Commissioner Carr. Japan has played a vital leadership role in protecting digital freedom, going back to the data free flow with trust idea put forward by Prime Minister Abe. Japan will be hosting the G7 in the next several months, and it's an important issue on that agenda as well. We are very pleased to have with us this evening from Tokyo the Vice Minister for Policy Coordination at the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communication of Japan. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Hiroshi Yoshida.
Thank you. I'm Hiroshi Yoshida, Vice Minister for Policy Coordination of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communication, Japan. Thank you for having me here today. And I understand that CSPS and Japan has been discussing for years on issues. And this year, I understand that digital freedom is a theme of discussion, and yes, as you said, in G7 context, we are discussing many aspects, including resilient infrastructure or open and free internet, and that is related closely to the theme of today's discussion, digital freedom. Yes, yes. For G7 meetings, we have many topics that are discussed in working group level. Yeah, now and we are going to have ministerial in April, and that includes a secure and resilient digital infrastructure, internet governance, and promotion of responsible AI and global AI governance, and data free flow with trust, and some others. Yes, so regarding the resilient infrastructure, so the discussion on radio system and the submarine cable, and for starting with submarine cable, so we think that it should be a resilient one, and we are discussing what kind of message we can send out on submarine cable, and also for open so radio system. We are now discussing whether we can include an open architecture of that radio network. Maybe most of you already know that even in the 7 countries, open system is not supported by all member countries or all member countries. But we think I understand that. So industry side, even in those countries who are reluctant to open system, industry is very positive to open architecture system, so that we can go forward to doing that, some sending up some kind of message. And the open RAN system itself is kind of interoperable and resilient infrastructure, and has the effect of cutting costs and efficient energy usage. And so the biggest thing is that telecommunications carriers can get rid of vendor lock-in, and so that we can provide efficient services also for global south. And we think that we are still now discussing in G7 for resilient infrastructure, but we need I believe that we need to involve global south or developing countries, so that so sometimes there are movements that in a different direction. So recently we don't hear so much, but several years ago there was a kind of proposal that the internet should be controlled by the government side. As you all well know, that internet is operated under the multi-stakeholder system, and it should be do so. And the government, so government control internet can create nothing. So, but sometimes for some of the developing countries, it can be an attractive option. So, so kind of authoritarian government. There are some those such countries in developing countries also, and so it is attractive for them that if they can control internet to control their people. But we really don't want that, and we need that. Of course, we should send a strong message from G7, as well as so involve developing countries, so that they can, so that they believe that they understand that so free and open internet is very important, and free and open architecture is very important for the development. And also we are going to have discussion on data free flow trust, and as you know, and as already said, so former Prime Minister Abe advocated first at the Davos in 2019, and it was agreed in G20 Osaka Summit, Leaders Summit, and it was agreed by G20 leaders. And but it was just a concept at that stage. Of course, the G20 countries agreed, but on the other hand, what is DFFT or what is trust is not we don't have a clear definition, of course, and some countries take the word trust as a tool for controlling data flow. And of course, our intention is that where trust exists, we can accelerate the more data flow. So that's what we want. But so after that, 2020, 2021, and the last year, Bali G20 declaration also included the concept of DFFT, and there was a discussion also in G7. And probably the concept of DFFT itself is very much understood by many countries. On the other hand, it's just a concept, but we want to have a concrete fruit. And so that we think that we should move into operational stage to make the result of the FFT. And we are now discussing on G7. And so, of course, G20 can make consensus on concept, sometimes interpreted differently by to country. But on the other hand, also for operational stage, it is very difficult to make consensus, or it's impossible to make consensus in G20. We should do it in G7, and to add with G7, we can make a kind of operationalized scheme that can involve other like-minded countries. Our intention is like that, and discussion is going like that, going right now, going in that direction, and we want to have some consensus before G7 Digital and Tech Ministerial to be take place in April, the end of April in Takasaki City, Japan. And of course, we have a Hiroshima summit in June, so that we try to make an input to leaders' declaration also. And what we are discussing on the G7 working group is like that. And yes, I'm looking forward to discussion here today. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Vice Minister. Let me go ahead and invite Andy Kaiser, Yutaka Kitagami, Priya Vora, and Dan Mahaffey, our panelists, up to the table. And while they're taking their places, I want to remind folks that after the panel discussion ends, you're invited to join us for some refreshments and a reception. Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Glenn, and thank you to Commissioner Carr and to Vice Minister Yoshida for your remarks. We certainly appreciate kicking it off, and hope that we can certainly add to the conversation that has been started here. We're looking at the issue of digital freedom, and it's so important to hear the word trust. We hear it in Prime Minister Abe's concept that he put forward of data free flow with trust. But in a free society, it is so important for an individual to be able to trust their decision making, to trust the information they see, to trust what they are hearing from their leaders, and to trust the infrastructure upon which the digital world, the digital domains, the digital economy, to trust that infrastructure upon which it operates, so that we know the information we're seeing and the increasingly networked society that we have is secure and reliable. And I think that the conversation we're going to have is going to cover much of that. Deputy Director General Kitagami joins us from the MIC from some thoughts there. Andy Kaiser from Navigators Global, also a CSPC senior advisor with experience previously on Capitol Hill in the House Intelligence Committee. And then Priya Vora, the managing director of the Digital Impact Alliance, but has also dealt with this quite a bit in her roles at USAID and other organizations. So first and foremost, Andy, I'll start with you. We talked about what we're seeing in terms of this space. What are we seeing now in what China and Russia are doing, as well as we talked about some of the stuff Congress has done already? where do you think Congress will go next on these topics?
Yeah, great question. It's always good to have alcohol for some of these items because they can get a bit scary. But we're certainly seeing two of our primary, our allied primary geopolitical adversaries, in the Chinese and the Russians, more closely collaborating than in years past. There's some very practical reasons for that. We've done a good work to help shut off their economic and military and technology access globally. So they're largely left with each other, but that does bring a whole host of concerns. It also reminds me of the important global nature of this, of the sort of the export control regime. If we're going to kind of squeeze the big fish in the pond, who I think we'll be referring to fairly extensively in today's debate, and Commissioner Carr mentioned as well, and that's in China. Of course, a lot of these technology issues are not strictly driven from the United States or from Japan, but they include other key allies like the Netherlands, who has a key company that makes semiconductor manufacturing equipment, or of course in South Korea, where you have technology giants there who lead in telecommunications, in semiconductors, in other areas. And if we're not allying in sequencing these export controls and ensuring compliance, there's going to be a hole, and that thing is going to leak like a sieve. So there's been a great deal of administration focus on sort of bringing allies along. Some are more interested in this effort than others, but we've seen good results. One to keep an eye on, I mentioned South Korea is one to keep an eye on. Another one is in India. I think they're a critical player. They've done some interesting things of kicking or banning key Chinese applications, for example. They banned TikTok before it was cool. But seeing where they go next. Are the Indians going to allow Chinese technology companies to manufacture in India the things that we all are prohibiting them from manufacturing in China? That would present a real problem to the world. So the sort of the global nature of the threats and the challenges and the opportunities to respond, I think, is your first question and point, Dan. The second one, what the heck is the Congress going to do about it? We have a former member of Congress here who may want to weigh in on these efforts, in Congressman Nye. I do think this is maybe the only issue you'll find that is truly bipartisan, if not nonpartisan. I think of last year, Speaker Pelosi stopping in Taiwan for her historic visit there. You see the China Select Committee that was stood up in the House to focus on these issues. Some were concerned they may overreach or be populated with bomb throwers. To a lot of us who watch this committee for a living, to great relief, that has not been the case from either the Republican or the Democratic side. It has been filled with very serious people who are interested in solving problems and not necessarily scoring political points. So that committee remains. And then sort of the historic bipartisan nature of the intelligence committees has been restored, as well as the foreign affairs committees. They're very nice. They're set up nicely. They're experiencing good, strong leadership. And so I think you'll certainly see the Congress supporting a more robust U.S. posture as it relates to securing technology and ensuring it stays in the hands of our allies, including a wonderful partner in Japan. I was at the embassy earlier today. It was beautiful as the cherry blossoms are beginning to bloom. It's a great time to have this conversation. So thank you for having me, Dan.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you for getting us started off. I think that dovetails right into Kitagami-san, your thoughts on, Andy mentioned what allies need to do together. what are the US and Japan doing? And certainly what can you tell us about what Japan is doing?
I see. Yeah, thank you for your introduction. I'd like to introduce, I think, two approaches for the collaboration between the US and Japan. And I think the first one is to gather resources of the US and Japan. And speaking about the Congress move, the United States passed the CHIPS Act, and so they are made a very strong plans. And actually, Japan is also, MIC of Japan have some POC resources to make the Oran experiment in the developing countries, and also the METI is a Ministry of Industry also established a very strong fund. And however, the country concerned, the China has input a very enormous resource to make his network or the 5G network to bring their components and do the network, and to resist or to compete with such cheaper some cases network. So we should gather such a resource of the US and Japan. And so we not only the financial resources, but also human resources and the information network. And so when a country begin bidding or the auction for the 5G network, so if there is a move of the country concerned, so we could share a network and so flexibly bring the support of the financial resource and also the public-private cooperation. So such a flexible gathering of the resources between the US and Japan is, I think, very important. And also it's important to bring such move not only between the US and Japan, and also other like-minded countries. And so I think so Mr. Carr and Vice Minister Yoshida also talked about the importance of the resilience of the infrastructure, and so such a flexible gathering of the resources is one approach, I think. So I stop first. Thank you.
Thank you. Priya, given Andy's talked about the threat and some of the competition, and the Vice Minister spoke about it too, and some of this is really unfolding in the developing world, where new technologies are being adopted, and not necessarily the ones we know, leapfrog technologies, the next generation. How do we see that, one, from your expertise unfolding, and then how do some of these efforts that we've started to discuss tonight help with that? I'd say, I don't want to say struggle yet, but this competition for what the developing world's digital future will look like.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and thanks for having me. And this is a very new dimension of digital for me, because I've spent the last 20 years focused on economic development, and I now run Digital Impact Alliance, which is working with African governments and policymakers around digital and data strategies, but much more from the standpoint of how do you use technology to accelerate social and economic progress. So the concept of digital freedom, frankly, isn't part of our day-to-day. And in fact, what we hear more often is, we don't want to be pawns in a new digital Cold War. And, and if you are, an ICT minister or head of state in Africa, and the Chinese investment package is so compelling, it's hard to turn down. And as one ICT minister once told me, maybe 2 years ago, either China's spying on us or the US is. So it's not quite as cut and dry, and in fact feels unproductive to have, the sense that they have to pick sides. What they really want are more investment options. They want to see more US and allied leadership investing in capacity building and standards and helping advance policies and regulations, legislation, trade agreements. They want kind of that full suite of support. And I would say very cynically, it's frustrating and, and this is glib and a little overstating, but, companies like Nokia and Ericsson have had a longer presence on the continent of Africa than Huawei and other Chinese firms. And so it begs the question in their mind, why isn't there that leadership and that investment coming in? Hopefully, as Kitagami says, the CHIPS Act and other things will change that. But it's I think an unproductive sometimes conversation and gets away from the business of how do we expand digital infrastructure? How do we use it for inclusive growth? And especially now post-pandemic, when the economic consequences have frankly been quite devastating.
Well, I'll follow on since I called on you last. I'll follow up first with you, though. What do you see in terms of some of these resources? We see the international funds included in the CHIPS Act, other efforts, the State Department elevating its digital bureaus. What other things are being done, do you think, or that we can build on to address some of those concerns that countries have about perhaps, as you say, a false choice being set up?
Well, I mean, I'm excited about those two things you mentioned, and I am excited for the funds to get flowing. So that's number one. But I think the more strategic question is, what is the positive vision we're trying to convey? So instead of having an anti-China stance, what is the positive vision? And I think the free flow of data concept, as Vice Minister mentioned, is a concept to build upon. So just to elaborate a little bit more on some of the frustration that governments we know feel, there's a sense of data being extracted from the continent, and whether that data is going back to the Chinese state or to Google, it feels like a new colonial effort to just extract and monetize data that's theirs, whether that's logical or not. But I think the idea of free flow of data is really one that can be very compelling in the global South, because at the end of the day, instead of trying to see these data silos, really grow under government agencies or within companies, it's a proposition that suggests you can create the data architecture for more innovators to benefit from data, for people to benefit from data. As you see in Estonia and India, some of that architecture is really creating secure data exchange for academics to access data lakes and understand health, and pandemic, related issues. So the free flow of data thing, I think, is a very compelling starting point of a strategic vision of what you want to see your technology future to really look like.
Kitagami-san, as we've mentioned now, building on the free flow with trust concept, what more do you think will be discussed about that? We have the G7 coming up, other efforts, the US and Japan leading in the ITU standards bodies. What do you see next?
What do I see next? Yes. So from the MIC point of view, DFFT is of course very important, and I think so another important initiative by MIC is how to tackle the disinformation.
Mm-hmm.
And so because so as for the disinformation, so democratic nations can't necessarily force to delete such information. So as for the MIC Japan, we also ensure the transparency and accountability of the companies by encouraging having the policies for the disinformation, and but in case of the infringement of the individual rights, they can delete the information based on the law. So so I think so we seek how to collaborate between the G7 countries. So as for the misinformation, and also we need to think about the ICT literacy. So even if the operator have the policies and tackle it properly, if the citizens can't deal with IT solutions and platforms, so the citizens are not helped. So I think the G7 is a very good opportunity to gather the wisdom of the democratic countries, and so the MIC of Japan is suggesting to make a practice to gather practices of the G7 countries and to show the practices on how to tackle the misinformation. And so by doing so, we can show how we can doing well to encourage the platformers to solve the disinformation problem, and how we are encouraging the citizens to have the right and proper IT literacy. So that's so this kind of disinformation matter is very important in the G7 too.
Well, thank you. I think we have this will come out of the G7, some deeper discussions on countering disinformation. Andy, I know it's a tough topic in the US, so we won't get into it too deep, because in a polarized society, one person's disinformation can be censorship. We have a very tricky path ahead with that, and I think too our Congress, while there's agreement, a lack of I'll say clarity or agreement on what exactly they want to do on some of these big tech issues. So we'll be continuing to look at that, and then perhaps how more transparency even about how the algorithms operate will be important. Priya, how do we work on this issue as they talk about of user education around the world? It's not just a hardware or technology issue. It's probably, in fact, more a human issue. What are the efforts we can do on user education around the world?
Yeah, I mean, obviously digital literacy is hugely important, but what I would say is that, at the end of the day, these are somewhat complex issues. The number of people who read terms and conditions, it's minuscule. The average time a person who does read their terms and conditions, it's 14 seconds. So it's, we can't put the responsibility on people to entirely understand algorithms and consent and data flows. But what I think we can do is really draw lessons from how different countries have invested in, or how there's investments in civil society, and really making sure that there's some groups are really informed about how data is being used, or how portals like X-Road used in Estonia is really has a citizen portal and gives people full clarity on what parts or what of their personal data is being shared with whom, for what purpose, and it goes down to the individual and government who might be accessing my data, not just the agency who's accessing my data. Or what India is doing to give full consent to people over at a very granular level for flow of their data. So I think there's a lot we can do to understand different approaches to giving people more agency and more transparency. But I guess I would be against some assumption that investing in digital literacy then means the responsibility is on people.
Well, I'm going to be cognizant of the time, because we do have our reception coming up, and I think that I don't want to stand in the way of drinks and appetizers. So I will say that, if you have questions for the panelists, I know they'll be staying around. So we'll forego a formal Q&A in favor of continuing the conversation at the reception. So why don't we do that? I look forward to chatting with some of you all. I want to thank the panelists for their thoughts, an appetizer of their own intellectually. So now let's enjoy one gastronomically. Thank you, everyone.